the athletes, they're chasing the impossible. You know what I mean? Like, everybody knows the odds are against you. The percentage is so low on who's going to make it. But every day you're waking up and you're chasing it. You know what I mean? So whenever you're assisting those guys in chasing it, it rubs off on me too. You know what I mean? Because that's all I'm doing is trying to help you achieve what the next person would tell you you can't. So for me, it allows me to keep on chasing what the next man might think would be impossible for me.
Stoked today to be joined by Jordan Arcement. Jordan is the owner of DVG Sports, which is a sports agency focused on college athletes as they navigate through this NIL space. Jordan has a rich history in coaching football and managing athletes, and has built this amazing team to service this new industry. I hope you guys enjoy.
Hey, it's Armin with Attract. At Attract Advisors, we offer accounting advisory, tax advisory, as well as financial management services. We're lucky enough to work with very many hardworking, talented entrepreneurs across many different industries. Many of these individuals are world-class in their sphere and have great stories to tell. This is our way of highlighting their accomplishments and their insights, and we hope you enjoy these conversations.
So, you playing football at Nichols, Southland Conference. I'm playing at Southeastern. I think we missed each other like just a few years, but kind of talk me through like the last couple years at Nichols and then what that morphed into upon graduation or leaving, Nichols as a student athlete.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think even with playing football at Nichols, I had no idea what I wanted to do after that. You know what I mean? And I think that's just a relatable piece to so many athletes who, I admire the ones who do have a plan. Like when I ask those guys what do they want to do after and they really know, I'm like, man, that's impressive, because I had no idea. Now, football ultimately took me to where I am now, and I'm super grateful for the ball because of that. But again, had no idea. And then my last couple of years, I really dealt with a lot of injury, you know what I mean? And with the injuries, there were some real lows, and I think because of those lows, it just taught me how to overcome. It taught me adversity. It taught me how quickly it could be taken away, which is also perspective, because guys nowadays, you deal with it. I mean, it's a brutal game. I'm sure you had injury in the midst of football. I don't know many people who haven't had it, you know what I mean? And sometimes devastating, sometimes small, you know what I mean? But being out whenever you aren't with the team, when you used to team, I think that's a real challenge. But post that, I just didn't really know what to do. So naturally, I was like, I'll coach football, you know what I mean? And I went back to my high school for a couple years, and I didn't want to teach yet. I was like, I don't know about the teacher thing, but I'll coach, and I coached, managed a nutrition shop in the midst of it during the day kind of deal. And then I decided, okay, I like coaching, right? And then it morphed into going coach and teach. I actually taught special ed, which was super interesting and fulfilling. You know what I mean? It was a cool time. We started a little business. We were selling cookies. I had like this easy bake oven little deal where everybody had a job, and we were selling cookies at lunchtime. You know what I mean? So anyway, I guess that's where my first entrepreneurial venture came. You know what I'm saying? And after that, or during that time, I dealt with the recruiting process a lot. I was really intrigued by the recruiting process. I wanted to get guys where they were going. We signed the most people in the area at the high school that I was at. It was like really unheard of on how many people got put into college from all levels, from my brother, Tay Martin, to D2, to all of the JUCOs in between. But that ultimately gave me a good football network because I was able to network with those coaches and send guys different places. So it was just helpful in my journey there. And then I realized, I want to do this in college, and I started to pursue it. But in that pursuit, I ended up interviewing with the Arizona Cardinals for a scouting position, just like out of left field. It was really, I feel like it was a God thing, because it was like, I didn't know how, or it was even funny to share with the next person whenever they're asking me, like, well, what are you preparing for? Like, why are you taking this scouting course? What are you doing? I'm like, man, I'm about to interview with the Cardinals. I think I'm going to work in the league. And they're like, yo, like, you're not even the head coach at the high school that you're at. And I'm like, I know, and push came to shove. I did get the interview. I did not get the job, though, which, again, I was just devastated, and ultimately landed at University of Virginia with my position coach from Nichols, Justin Anderson, who was leading the personnel department. So my first job in college football was a film evaluator, and then that was kind of the beginning.
So I remember when I played at Southeastern, and I've said this on the podcast before, and you know this, but like we were really bad my first few years. They fired the coaching staff. New coaching staff came in. Ron Roberts was the head coach, who's now DC at Arkansas, was at Florida before that in Auburn. Pete Golding was my defensive coordinator, who's now at Ole Miss. Carl Scott spent a lot of time as the DB coach at Alabama, and then now he just won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. Patrick Toney's now, he was like, for like 3 days, the new defensive coordinator at Ole Miss, and then he went, I think, to the Falcons. And so all of these winners, like from a coaching perspective, are really what I think taught me what success looked like and how to lead teams and deal with issues and stuff like that. But I can remember watching them with the grind, right? Because you are day in and day out, 6 a.m. arrival, 10 p.m. leaving, maybe on an early night. And then in the off season, you got to recruit. And even back then, coaches would move around a lot, so real tough on their family and their children and whatnot. So can you take me through like the day in and day out of what your time at Virginia looked like? What times you wake up? Did you have time to do anything else other than coach and recruit? And what lessons did you learn about what it takes to be successful at that point?
Man, I think the first one will be sacrifice, right? And you named all of those guys who were at Southeastern, and that probably was a sacrifice, right? Because of what they're making right now, I'm sure is a multiple of 10 plus. Mm-hmm. You get what I mean? And you've got to know what you want and attack it and bet on yourself, right? And that was, when I say Virginia called and I had the opportunity, it wasn't that it was, to the outside, it was like, oh, Jordan's going to work at a Power 4. He's leaving high school. Like, that's, awesome. You thinking I'm making a whole bunch of money. Like, heck no, man. I was making $25,000. It was called a part-time role. It was nothing part-time about it. You get what I mean? I had no insurance. I lived on an air mattress, but ultimately I was like, I'll flip this into something else. You know what I mean? And I believe that, though. You know what I mean? And I trusted the opportunity, which, it'd be interesting to hear all those guys you named on what was their first job in college and what they were doing. Maybe not getting paid at all. Mm-hmm. Probably similar. I heard of guys sleeping in their car, like all types of stuff. You know what I mean? So sacrifice first and foremost, and, I mentioned I was working for Justin Anderson in the recruiting department or personnel department, and I had the opportunity to coach at Memphis around that same time. I could have took a coaching route or off the field personnel route. And I didn't know necessarily the direction because I was coming from being a player and a coach. That's what I knew. But because of that time constraint that you said, right? Like, ultimately, no matter what role you have in college football, it is that. You know what I mean? But sometimes at some parts of the year, it can be a little bit less contingent on your role. And as I was navigating it, I saw really for the coaches, their demand on time was more than ours. Like, it was still the same early mornings, but not necessarily the 10 p.m. Sometimes, you know what I mean, depending on what's going on, like part of the year, who's on campus, what we're doing, how we're courting them. But the coaches had a major demand, and I watched those guys and I watched their families come in, and the only time they could spend time with family would be if they came to them in the building. Mm-hmm. And for me, knowing that one day I want a family, I found it hard to say, okay, I'm going to pursue being a position coach or coordinator or a head coach because I didn't know if I wanted to sacrifice that. You know what I mean? Now, what I was doing from an off the field role, you still have to sacrifice a lot. I mean, you're away for holidays. There is the moving and the trying to climb and the weekends are gone, and they are the late nights, right? At Virginia, Coach Bronco Mendenhall was the head coach at my time there, and he's a God-fearing man, and he gave us off on Sundays. So that was like just unknown.
Unheard of, too,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, and we had success. I mean, we went to the Orange Bowl, the ACC championship. We, it was cool, and he did a really good job running that program, but he saw that as needed, like, right, that day of rest or that day with family to recharge. And, some days it would still be me going pick somebody up or drop somebody off at the airport on a Sunday. So I'm like, I thought we were off. So everybody except me. I'm like, okay, but anyway, it was nice to have that break. And I do think that there was like a bit of a recharge there. And he also had on his schedule on Thursdays, we would meet at his house. Our staff meeting was at his house. And then afterwards, you'd have a shorter day. That was during the season. You know what I mean? Now, in the off season, it was still what it was. But during the season, he would do that. So it was almost like Thursday evening and Sunday, you got a chance to either spend time with family, but he just thought that it was so important you could still have success in doing that. I admired him for that. You know what I mean? And I enjoyed working for him. But yeah, I think sacrifice is a big thing when it comes to the coaching profession, but a lot of people see it as their ministry, right? Like they're pouring into so many and changing so many lives, but your own family sometimes is who takes the toll,
I think it takes a lot of maturity and a lot of foresight to be able to see that, okay, in 3 years, I'm going to be here, and a lot of other people who are my age are going to start having children and thinking about, like, what is that going to look like for me? I feel like a lot of times coaches, or really in the industry, they'll get into something and just focus on like the day by day and never really zoom out and look at like what the future looks like. And then when they get to that point in the future that 3 or 5 years ago they never thought about, when they get to that point, it's too late. And it takes, again, a special type of consciousness and like forward-looking ability. Where did you get that from?
I have no idea. I mean, I guess I was blessed with it. I don't know, to have some sort of foresight, and especially through my time in football, I feel like it has been a gift, you know what I mean? Because to ultimately step out, have my own business in the representation space, I saw the evolution of college football. I saw it changing. I saw what was coming, and I tried to position myself for it. You know what I mean? So I'm grateful to have that. You know what I mean? I don't know where I will be without it. You know what I mean? So I'm not sure where I got it from, but I'm definitely thankful to be able to see a little bit and then to do some preparation for what's next. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and maybe it was even the injuries, because I could think back when I was at Southeastern. I mean, I tore my knee up my senior year, ACL, MCL, and PCL. And just like you, I mean, you said it on your last podcast interview with G Sports that like so much of your identity had been wrapped up into you as the athlete.
Yeah.
And I think looking back for me in my injury, that was like the defining moment, because that was my wake up call when the stakes were pretty low to say how you planned it is not how it turned out. And you need to be thinking about the next time you're doing something and you might get injured. That is like start playing a play or two ahead of where it's going to be. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head as it relates to even where you're at today, which we'll get into in a minute. But like, you learn from your experience. Like at the time, it felt like, I'm sure for you, I know it did for me, like just like world ending. But like, what a blessing it is to look back now because of the, you learn the playbook at that point.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, that was, injury was something, man. And, this part was crazy for me is that I almost didn't play football. Like I had the opportunity to play football at Nichols, and then, for me to be eligible, I was gonna have to take this extra class or something. And I was like, I don't want to take this class. You know what I mean? Like, man, I'm just not gonna play. Like, which is crazy because football's my life. So I can't imagine that at that point in my life I was saying that. But the weirdest thing, there was a girl who I went to school with, and she reached out to me, and it was like out of nowhere. And she's like, Jordan, I don't know what this is, but I feel like God is telling me you need to play football at Nichols. And I was like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, am I going to the league? You know what I mean? I'm thinking
what else did he say?
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, this is it. Like, what's going on? And I was like, okay. And then a great friend of mine who had went to Louisiana Tech first, then a week later, he calls me like, hey, I'm transferring back to Nichols, bro. Like, you need to come play football. You know what I mean? And I'm like, so now it was just too many coincidences.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm coming to play football. So I decided to. But then when I had the injury, that's what was so confusing to me. I'm like, well, why am I even doing this? Why am I here? You know what I mean? So like from a defining moment, it also was for me a moment of like question on why does adversity continue to hit? You know what I mean? And I look at it like sometimes we don't know that answer for a while, because I didn't know that answer for a while, you know, but it took time, and then after time it came full circle, and I saw why. I saw the relationships that I made there. I saw the things that I learned there. I saw, you know, what led me to want to do what ultimately I feel like is my calling. You know what I mean? So like without that, I don't know if I would have developed into what ultimately I was supposed to. You know what I mean? So it is a defining moment, but it didn't come with like the aha. It was like a real like, I can't believe this is happening. You know what I'm saying? I could have just not played. Why am I hurt? You know what I mean? So anyway, but yeah, I do think defining moment, you know.
So at Virginia, and then kind of fast forward to coming back to Baton Rouge, which is really the first time that I had heard about you. Obviously, college football at that point was continuing to transform. So can you walk me through kind of like what that move looked like time-wise? And, I mean, how'd you even get the spot?
Yeah, well, at Virginia, COVID happened, right? So when COVID happened, we had so much downtime, right? In a sport that you never have downtime, like we working from home, doing Zooms, and I'm like, what is this? Like, I just need something else to do, you know what I mean? And my brother Tay was at Oklahoma State at the time. He ended up leading the Big 12 in receiving, and a lot of agents were reaching out to us, right, to recruit him to see who he was going to go with on the pro side. This was before, you know, representation in college, et cetera, et cetera. And the first wave of NIL was just marketing, right? And he was pretty marketable, you know. So as I was learning about marketing, because that was like a question we'd ask to the places, you know, like, well, what can y'all do with off the field? Are there any things that y'all be able to provide resource-wise off the field? So I started learning about that. And then I realized when NIL was coming, the first wave, the initial push, it was just marketing. You know what I mean? That was before what it is today. And I'm like, it's the same thing that we've been doing, that we've learned about. I'm like, well, this COVID stuff is boring. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go do that. So I left once. Like, I left college football before coming to LSU, and I joined Shock Doctor. I did some stuff with them. I helped start a 7-on-7 circuit, but ultimately I was doing my own thing on the side with doing marketing for a lot of the athletes that I had met along the way. And I even sold life insurance just to be able to like get that thing going, just because I wanted to spend Tay's senior year with him, and I wanted to really learn the space. And once he got to the league, how I ended up getting to LSU was a great friend of mine, J.R. Belton, who you know as well, when we all were at a particular event together, which was cool. But J.R., I had met him when I interviewed at Louisiana Tech, and then I brought him to Virginia with me. So in the midst of that time with my transition, he had transitioned to LSU with Coach O. And then when Coach O departed and Coach Kelly came in, JR had some influence, you know what I mean? And they were like, you got to come back. You got to come back, and you need to come back to LSU now. And I'm like, I'm coming back. You know what I mean? and that was how it began. And then it kind of evolved from there, though, you know.
So you're at LSU, obviously back home. NIL landscape is completely changing. New coaching staff. Get a big win that first year with Alabama, in overtime.
Yeah, that was crazy.
What did your day by day look like at that point? And how wild is it looking at NIL the day you came in LSU to like the day that you left?
Yeah, the day I came in LSU, NIL was still at a place where it was just marketing, and people were just starting to figure out how to corral money into a pot and divvy it. You know what I mean? And I remember our first NIL guys were all transfers, and they were all Garden athletes. You know what I mean? Because that was like the initial push, and then after that, the collective began, and the original emergence of collectives nationally was just essentially like a pocket of money that was a salary pool. You know what I mean? But how it's grown so much, you know what I mean? The original collective was probably a couple $1 million, you know what I mean? And then from with that, we started to try to pay the whole team something, right? And then some guys got a little more if they were like the Garden athlete or had a Canes deal or maybe something with walk-ons, and then, okay, now the pot grew, you know what I mean? But probably to just 4, you know what I mean? And now that was the salary pool, or our quote unquote salary cap, because it was all we had. So not that they had a cap, but it was our cap because that's what we had in it. And then that number just continued to escalate, you know what I mean? And it grew larger. Now everybody was kind of figuring the nuances on how to do it, and then what schools could do it better than others, who had the best infrastructure, how can you rally the troops and just get max dollar. And then came rev share, you know what I mean? Rev share coming down the landscape, and I knew that would really change a lot. You know, to me, that made it closer to a pro game and just more big business, because now the university was actually involved. Whereas when it was just third party, you know, it was one hand removed, and if the contract, it wasn't so pressed about the contract favoring university because they weren't involved that much, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then when they were going to be, and now are, I knew the level of sophistication was really going to rise, you know, and really, if rev share passed on Friday, I was working for a mega sports agency on Monday kind of deal. and that was the start of the transition, you know?
Yeah, man, what a crazy time. Like, it's like so much happened in like 4 years time, or maybe even less, right? Because I think that the first NILs came out in like 2022, or the collectives, I mean. And then, you know, you look at, I mean, I've heard you talk about some of these early LSU athletes who were transfers, like just 4 years ago or 5 years, they were making like what a third string DB makes right now. And this was like the best quarterback in the country, or whatever position, right?
Yeah.
So like, what was the temperature like around like the football ops building at that time? Because you're almost in a world where the rules are always changing. It's less about football, you know, it's more about like, again, assigning value to different players and negotiating and stuff like that. Like, was it a distraction? And how did y'all kind of try to navigate that?
I mean, yeah, I would say definitely not necessarily a distraction, but a responsibility. I added responsibility that wasn't necessarily added in the football landscape prior, you know? So now you're deeming people particular jobs to try to have success in that space, but then also the coaches, you know what I mean? Like, I remember us having an event at Supper Club, and, you know, we just have a ton of people there. Coach Kelly's there, I remember Coach Frank Wilson, and Joe Sloan, myself, and we were like deemed like the original crew who was going to try to raise the money, you know what I mean? But speaking to the people, and so like, you know, was it a distraction? I mean, you know, it was a good event, it was cool, you know, it was networking, it was all of those things, but that was something that normally, the head coach was probably having to do a little bit of fundraising, because ultimately that was for the athletic department, but now it was for the program, you know what I mean? And at that time, you know, now came assigning values, like you said, right? And I mean, we had former GMs coming into the building, and we were meeting with them and just talking about strategy and different things from a standpoint of NFL side and how can we relate it. But it was just different because, you know, the NFL side just had more structure. You know, you actually did have a cap, and you did know the market and the landscape, whereas on college you were just kind of trying to figure out what the next school was doing and how big was their pot and what was true on what you were hearing versus what's not. So even the NFL GMs were like, this is a different beast than what we dealt with on a higher level. But at that time, you know, I do some of that, you know, just with the evaluation of it and doing some negotiation with family and athlete. But I felt like it wasn't the most fitting for me, you know what I mean? But again, great experience, right? But I didn't like being the one to tell you were not getting this, you know what I mean? Because I valued the rapport with the young man, you know what I mean? And ultimately, as it kept evolving, we brought somebody else in who was able to deal with a lot of that. And then for me, I dealt with the marketing stuff, which was something that I had a background in as well, right? So now I was the addition too, right? And I just saw it as more fitting, because if you were a little let down that your quote unquote salary was small, I could go get you a little extra or you know, source another stream of revenue. Yeah. And you're like, this is my guy, you know what I mean? So that was more fitting, and I felt more aligned there, where it's like, yeah, I want to be, I'm not trying to be the bad guy in this whole thing. You know what I mean? And then plus, I mean, transparently, I knew I probably was going to transition into what I'm doing now, and that was messing up my foresight. You know what I mean? If I was not received the right way. So I'm like, nah, I got to position myself to be received the right way, because ultimately there may have to be a play where I end up on the player side, and I surely wouldn't want to be a foe. I'd rather be an ally,
So one thing that I've always wondered, and we can cut this part out if you don't feel like answering, but it's like when you think about bringing in talent, it obviously takes a lot of capital. I don't think that there's any formal salary cap or anything at this point, but like you see it a lot in businesses as well. Like they'll go get the thing that they need to improve their business and then worry about how they're going to pay for it later. So if you're open to it, I'm curious as just maybe college landscape overall, is that the case where athletes or coaches or whoever are targeted by decision makers in a program, and negotiations happen and they come to basically a mutually beneficial agreement, but the funds aren't there yet? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I think that's happening. You know what I mean? I think it's just a race for success, and this pressure to win, that you're having to divvy out numbers that you're hoping to fulfill. You know what I mean? And there is some sort of set amount that you can guarantee, the rev share piece, right? Because the rev share is X amount of dollars that's allocated to football from the university each particular year, right? So on our end or the player side, in that negotiation, you can count on rev share money as like guaranteed money. You know what I mean? Because I know y'all have it as the university. Whereas all of the third party money, that's the part. You get what I mean? That's the part where it's like, that's a lot. You know what I mean? And how are you going to fulfill it? How are you going to get it passed through? Do y'all have it? You know what I mean? And just trying to make sure the contract is favorable to the athlete, and they have the best that you can with the landscape and the ruling and how you can write it to have some sort of backstop to make it as guaranteed as possible. You know what I mean? But ideally, if you can maximize the rev share piece, it at least feels safer, And then I think for coaches, it'll be interesting, because I think when you promise out a number and you're trying to fulfill that particular budget, if you're having success, it'll be easy to fulfill it. But if you start losing, you know what I mean, then what happens to the faucet? You know what I mean? Does it get turned off? And if it does, then what? But I think some coaches may just be banking on the universities not wanting to have a black eye to say, like, we couldn't fulfill our pot of money and we're going to find a way to give it. So they just said, we're going to promise it. You know what I mean? 'Cause we got to win.
So you decide to leave LSU. You mentioned earlier, mega sports agency. You, through your relationships and your skills and your experience, like you became someone who these agencies wanted to align with. It's very similar to how Attract ended up starting, whereby I was in corporate and I had this opportunity to basically move into a different way for me to make money. I wasn't an owner yet, but it was the step to take to become an owner, which I think is very similar to where you were at. Talk me through kind of like what that experience was like, whereby you took a risk, you kind of cut your downside a little just because you were at a great organization. Like you didn't go out on your own right away. Yeah. And yet you had upside, but the upside was probably also tapped. Like what lessons did you kind of learn in that controlled environment, leaving a respected like institution that historically was successful, and then moving into this new realm?
Yeah, I think originally, because the brand I was a part of was LSU and it's such a powerful brand, you know what I mean? I wasn't confused in the sense of with what brand equity had, because I was also at Virginia prior to LSU, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So being at Virginia and recruiting at Virginia was different than recruiting at LSU. LSU was more attractive, you know what I mean? So with joining the company that I was with, I knew that the transition would be pretty smooth because brand equity, you know what I mean, and just their experience in the field, you know, to allow me to prosper and prosper fast, you know. And I didn't know that I was necessarily gonna break off and do my own thing as I was joining that particular company. I was hopeful that I can grow, progress, and, you know, see where it went from there, you know. But as time passed, I just, you know, leaving LSU was about alignment for me. You know, when we lost Kyron, I just really felt like I had to be on the player side. I had to do it a certain way, you know, with my time and my pour into and what I surrounded them with, and I guess just my level of wanting to care for them, you know what I mean? And ultimately I was able to do that at the company I was with as well. But I wanted to, as I continue to scale, to be able to have a supporting cast around me so that way I could scale while still providing the most value that I could for my group, and not sacrifice. As I was scaling, my time would be more limited and I wouldn't be able to spend with the dudes that I wanted to. So in my mind, it was like, I've got to find a way to put people around me to pour into them if ultimately my time is limited because I'm scaling, you know what I mean? And then, you know, through my network, I just had some people who were willing to support me, you know what I mean? And that was a great blessing as well, just to have the support, you know, to feel comfortable and saying, hey, let's do it, you know?
So I look at it as like visually, like you crossed a bridge, right? You were at LSU, you crossed a bridge to get into this, you know, large sports agency. At that point, were you afraid about the ability to go back across that bridge to kind of work back with LSU as it relates to like now you're on the other side of the table? Or, because I mean, you kind of strike me as a guy who can do things tactfully and, you know, not really make it personal or hurt somebody's feelings back at LSU. Was that a fear for you? And did that actually, like, how'd that play out?
No fear. That was it was interesting. It was interesting, especially with the original dynamic, because everybody who was at LSU whenever I originally transitioned was everybody who I worked with. You know, then, you know, that was blown up in the transition, and then, you know, Coach Kiffin and Co came, and there's some familiar faces there, but a lot of new. You know what I mean? So with the new, then it became similar to any other school, I guess. But at first, it was different, you know what I mean? But I already was anticipating the difference, you know what I mean? And I just always been more of a player guy than a corporate guy, you know what I mean? So whenever, I think nobody was confused, you know what I mean? Whenever the chair was like, it might have been like, okay, you know, and it was gonna be something to handle. But yeah, it was okay though, you know what I mean, with keeping it professional and being able to conduct business appropriately, you know, and make sure that it was going to be favorable to the athlete. But it was something, you know what I mean? It was something. And then in the midst of that, though, we didn't get to finalize really any of those deals because it was, you know, the conversations had begun with a lot of them, but then with the blow up and the transition, which happened during the season, you know what I mean, as the new group was coming in, it was like a new deal to get the ones across the line that we were working on to make sure that, you know, they were going to be secured and attend the university, you know.
And then another bridge. Okay, the bridge between the big sports agency, crossing the bridge into now, you know, DVG Sports. And so talk about DVG, if you can, and talk about how you navigated that bridge. And ultimately just kind of intro, like elevator pitch. What is it the DVG does? Who do you help? Those types of things.
Yeah, the next bridge. So yeah, there was just a lot of thought about how this was going to continue to go, how I was going to continue to progress, how I was going to continue to be happy, how I was going to continue to divide my time. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I mean? And, you know, if we back up, and even as we were talking about foresight earlier, from, you know, high school to college to, you know, I was trying to forward think, you know what I mean? Because I'm not getting any younger. You know, I'm 35 years old and I'm not getting any less ambitious. So like, what's the timeline? Like, when's it gonna bubble? When's it gonna bust? And how do I make sure that it does, you know? And then in that time, just doing soul searching, praying, trying to figure out what was next. And, you know, DVG is, stands for David versus Goliath. You know, I have the shirt on, and, you know, I had been studying the book, you know, and in the midst of that, it was just inspiring me. You know what I mean? It was like, it was. And like, I had some sort of pull even whenever I first left before joining the mega company to do it on my own. But at that point, I felt like I shouldn't. And maybe that was just me being scared or nervous or not listening. You know what I mean? And in this next moment, I felt like I know the way, you know what I mean? And I felt like I wanted to trust and listen, you know, similar to what David did in the midst of that battle with Goliath, because he knew who was on his side, and that was God, you know what I mean? So I felt like if I did it the right way for the right reasons, and ultimately I used the platform to give the credit where credit was due, and then try to make a positive change with young men and passion meet purpose, that it was going to be successful. So with crossing the bridge, it didn't necessarily, I wasn't fearful, you know what I mean? Just for the same reason that David didn't walk up to Goliath, he ran at Goliath. You know what I mean? Because he had these stones in his pocket, and ultimately he felt like he knew how the story was going to end because it was already written. You know what I mean? So for me, it was like, no, I probably should have just always trusted that it would have been successful anyway, even if it would have been a harder path. It was going to work. You know what I mean? So now it was like, okay, I trust that it's going to work. I trust that this is the time that I'm supposed to do it, and I'm ready to roll. And then with making that decision and ultimately deciding to leave, provision came, you know what I mean? But it took the trust, I think, before the provision. And then with the provision, it just allowed me to start at a different height, because now I had, you know, Brandon and Jeff behind me who were giving me a runway to put together the company on how I saw it need to be put together, rather than having to say, I'm starting at square one, you know, upon making this dollar, we've got to put it to this, but we can't grow yet because of this. You know, I wasn't faced with that challenge, you know what I mean? And, you know, being in alignment with them was really important to me, because I get presented with opportunity a lot, you know, but what's glitter isn't always gold, you know what I mean? And I learned, I think, over the years, especially at LSU, especially during fundraising, especially, you know, through times of having just to deal with people where sometimes you know, it looked good or it sounded good, but it always came with something else, you know what I mean? And learning, you know, what's worth it, you know?
Yeah, and what's the cost?
What's the cost, you know? And with Brandon and Jeff, I knew that they sincerely were just wanted to see me succeed, you know? And it just made all of the sense in the world. And I was just so grateful, man. I mean, honestly, like, after our original conversation, then we got on a Zoom to like really dive deeper. And it was like, here's the headquarters, you know, meet your pilot. You know, you've got a plane, like, this is how we're going to do this thing, you know, boom, boom, boom. And I just paused and, you know, just put my hands on my face, and I was grateful, you know what I mean? I was grateful for them. I was grateful, you know, that God sent them my way. My mom thinks Brandon's an angel, you know what I'm saying? So it's just, it all was fitting, you know, even from that standpoint. She had met him already, and my mom's a real God-fearing woman who been praying for me for as long as ever, before I was this version of Jordan, you know what I mean? When I was a little rough around the edges after, you know, just trying to figure it out as a young teen, you know? So I know she's happy too for me to be around good men, you know? So it's been good.
So you start DVG, you have a very particular athlete, young man that you like to work with. Can you kind of describe that? Like, what type of young man are you looking for? And like, what is it that you could help them achieve?
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's cookie cutter, because growing up I was rough around the edges, and then always, even with the friends that I always had friends that were rough around the edges, and I never necessarily judged people because they were rough around the edges. It was more so, hoping that I could rub off on them in a positive manner. You know what I mean? So it's not like this cookie cutter, like, oh, if you're not this type of person, sometimes it's people who need the guidance and need someone to help them through, but with that help they ultimately can achieve greatness. But being a part of that journey is really cool, and I was telling a athlete the other day why I enjoyed doing this with them. And it was where when I started doing a lot of the corporate stuff in college and fundraising and doing administrative stuff that I felt like I got away from, because on that side it was just always fixing problems and drama. And also, that comes with business and stuff like that, right? But with the athletes, they're chasing the impossible. You know what I mean? Like, everybody knows the odds are against you. The percentage is so low on who's going to make it. But every day you're waking up and you're chasing it. You know what I mean? So whenever you're assisting those guys in chasing it, it rubs off on me too. You know what I mean? Because that's all I'm doing is trying to help you achieve what the next person would tell you you can't. So for me, it allows me to keep on chasing what the next man might think would be impossible for me. You know what I mean? So what do I look for? I think is alignment and like relationships that make sense. I'm just particular about people, and the beauty is I don't have to just say yes to somebody, and the other beauty is if the relationship doesn't work, we can walk away. You know what I mean? And with not necessarily the drama and the strings attached that might be, on different levels. I mean, it's literally just like, if it's not working no more, like, we just send an email and like, okay, well, good luck. You know what I mean? So there's beauty in that too. You know what I mean? And just having relationships where, you just feel like they make sense,
Have you ever been surprised when going to, I guess, recruit? I mean, that's what we're doing. We're recruiting.
Of course.
But going to recruit an athlete and just being surprised at either how close-minded he is or how close-minded the people are around him? Or is it such that really across the board, these high school athletes are more so out of fear, wanting to learn more now? Like, do you ever get kind of like that objection to say, nah, we got it, like, we don't need X, Y, or Z?
Yeah, I think definitely you face objections and people think that they don't need it. And I think now, more so than ever, there is some educational pieces to it. But I think the landscape has grown and there's enough media pub around it that the understanding that you should have representation. Now how quality representation you end up choosing sometimes ends up maybe becoming an issue for what type of deal they ultimately get, But yeah, I mean, recently, this was this past weekend, I dealt with a family where the father thought it was time for the athlete to get representation. His mother was not sold on representation. She just, she didn't trust very easily, and rightfully so. This is your baby, and you want to make sure the people around them are the right people, So when I got to their house to have the meeting, I was visiting with the dad and the athlete, and mom was taking a while to even come join the room, for the meeting. And I was curious if she was gonna come in or like how it was gonna be. And when she came in, I felt the, almost the tension in a sense of wanting to see what this was about and was it real. And I just started to share my story with mom, you know what I mean? And as I was sharing my story with mom, I just felt her guard drop, and then she just complimented me on being genuine and authentic. And, she was a spiritual lady. So like, as we just took that deep dive of, myself having a praying mother and that's what she was, and et cetera, et cetera. The conversation went on for a while, but by the end of it, she looked at the athlete and said, so you signed it with him, huh? So it went from her being
You closed her.
the most objective to like, okay, listen, let me tell you something, you know what I mean? So I was thankful for that, you know what I mean, and us finding alignment, but that's not always the case, Some people do think that they have it, and that's okay, you know what I mean? Sometimes I won't fight super hard to object that if it doesn't make sense. And then sometimes it's worth just keeping the rapport and letting them go through the first cycle, maybe independently, and doing the deal, and then with seeing what the next man or their teammate, ultimately how their deal landed versus theirs, they then circle back and want representation for the next go around. So, there are a lot of football players, you know what I mean? So I just try not to, if it makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't, it's all good, you know?
And I'm just thinking about, like, at that point in time, man, even at the old spot where you were at is kind of how we got connected, right? So like you mentioned, we both went to an event in Lake Charles that Brandon and Jeff put on. And, how I met those guys was kind of a God thing too. Like, I've got this friend, Phil Nico, and Phil's well connected, just major networker. He's a great guy. And he's friends with John Gordon. And Brandon and Jeff were also friends with John Gordon. John Gordon was putting on this, it's called Training Camp Live. And so he'd bring in all of his clients who like these big name coaches to come speak for a day. And, he had Sean McVay, and Kevin O'Connell, and Mac Brown was there. I'm trying to think of who's Eddie George was there, who was like my childhood idol. And so my friend Phil says, "Hey man, I got us a ride to Jacksonville." And I'm like, "Bro, I just had, I think at the time was my third child, and my wife was pregnant with our fourth." And I said, "Bro, I'm not sitting in the car to Jacksonville. Like, I'm not going to go." He's like, "No, you dummy, it's a plane." And I was like, "Man, I never rode on a private plane before." So it turns out it was Brandon and Jeff. So they left Lake Charles, Lafayette, whatever, early in the morning, and flew down, picked us up in Hammond, and then we flew to Jacksonville for the day, chopped it up with all those guys. Like, Dabo was there. Dabo and McVay were kind of like the keynotes. And it was just an amazing experience. And so, the plane ride, though, still took a couple hours. So I'm stuck in the plane, not stuck, but like I'm in the plane with these dudes. And, we just became like fast friends. And so then that's how, you and I linked up. But I think even at that time, I guess you'd heard a little bit about what it is that I did, with the CPA side or whatever. And I feel like then quickly you and I became fast friends. Yep. But can you kind of talk about how you've built this team around you? Attract is, at this point, a solid member of the team, I think. Like, what is it that you look for in the other pros who service your guys as it relates to whether it's the attorney or the accountant? And, like, where did you get the idea to kind of, like, build this circle around the athlete?
Man, yeah, I think it takes a village, to ultimately surround the athlete, right? And I think what I got a chance to learn at LSU by networking and fundraising and dealing with a lot of people who were very successful in business was I got a chance to learn a lot about business, because they would want to learn about what I had going on and think my job was really cool. But I thought them being able to come eat with me at 3:00 in the afternoon was really cool. So I wanted to know what did they do and how were they successful. So with that, I think I started to see what type of team members they had around them, to operate with that sort of enterprise or business, you know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, like we said earlier, the price for an athlete just kept climbing and climbing and climbing. And then, I had experience at LSU with seeing guys who maybe didn't file taxes or didn't set up an LLC and maybe didn't know why, you know what I'm saying? Or if they should. And then at LSU, I started connecting people with just either a financial advisor or whatever, maybe someone to start them an LLC, but it was just, again, it was all beginning. So it was starting to see how to navigate and how much money and what was needed and when. And then, when I met you and it was tax strategy as well as, the accounting work and CPA and et cetera, it was like, okay, well, I know that these guys are going to make a whole bunch of money. no taxes are going to be taken out. They have no idea that you're even supposed to pay taxes because they never paid taxes before, and they have no idea what sort of tax bracket that they're in with the amount of money that they're receiving. So what's going to happen? You know what I mean? And that was scary for me to think about, because I'm like, well, we're going to have a documentary in a few years where it's like tax evasion, college sports, and it would be some sad stories, and not because they were being ill-intended, just because of lack of education. So it was like, okay, what can I do? How can I help? And the other thing was, I knew that if my job is to maximize your value on the field and make you a bunch of money, but I didn't have any plan for you and what you were going to do after with it, maybe I'll harm you more than I'll help you. So that was also scary for me. You know what I mean? To be like, so, okay, I'm going to get him all of this, and then what? He's going to spend it all or buy a bunch of things that lead to his demise? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want that either. So then it was like, okay, the place that we met felt like a great place because of the setting, because of Brandon and Jeff, and even with how I'm, business partners with them now. You see the alignment on us being here and what we've been able to do with some guys. And so that was a good start for me because I trust them, you know what I mean? And I was like, okay, if they like John, and then, we had some similarity in, college sports background, the Southeastern Nichols thing and all of that stuff. So I wanted to give it a go, so I know, I came here, met with you for the first time, and then we just started to dabble with some athletes, and then over time continue to find just or define our process on what that would look like onboarding wise, and now even just getting into from startup of the business to the payroll to the strategy to then filing the taxes and, expand from there, you know what I mean? But I think even for the guys, ultimately, just taking the call and being educated, right, and understanding why you should have an LLC, what does payroll look like, what does quarterly taxes look like, and just hearing some knowledge of business is beneficial, regardless if they don't even follow through with it afterwards. It's at least familiar, because I think with how the landscape is now, you should, if you don't blow it, right, leave college with a lot of money, right? So like, let's say if the league doesn't work out, then what's next, right? Ultimately, you may have met a lot of people in college, you may have grew a network, you might have business plans, and then you become a young entrepreneur, you know what I mean? So with becoming a young entrepreneur and not having to start off life at just a regular old job, you can conduct a business early. So if you start exposing you to business practice early, or it's reps, you know what I mean? So by the time they then begin on their own, maybe they'll have some success, you know what I mean? Or one step closer to success, you know what I mean? Maybe it's their first business and it doesn't boom how they thought, but then that rep led to the one that actually worked, So anyway, I think it's about trying to find good people, and people who have a genuine spirit and hopefully a good background and a reputation, right? And want to do it the right way, and keep the athlete in the center and make them the priority, you know what I'm saying? And if we can help them and service them, I think we'll all prosper in that situation,
So when you think about like business in general, and forget college athletes or pro athletes for a second, but EOS is how we run our company, the Entrepreneur Operating System, and there's three main tenets. There is finance and admin, kind of all together in one. You've got the operations, and then you've got the sales and marketing, right? And when I look at like your skill set, I mean, you are sales and marketing all day. Like, that's what's in your blood. Then, whether you meant to or not, you built out this operations deal where it's like these guys who are advisors now to your athletes, excellent businessmen. They've seen amazing things. It's like a board of directors, right? And they are amazing operators and entrepreneurs. And then you built out the finance and administration side, which finance, a little bit of a tract, like you said, tax planning, tax prep. We've got strategy built in, both long-term and short-term. And then another piece of that is the financial advisory piece. So whether it's setting up retirement for some of these student athletes now to get the tax deduction and put money away for the future, or even life insurance, right? Like, even some of these guys are building up to a lifestyle where they're spending a lot of money and they can afford it, but God forbid if something ever happened to them, how would they be protected? So you've got the finance piece set out, and then even within DVG, you've built out this administrative team. And talk a little bit about like how it's been for you to become a coordinator of all of these ways to help out your athletes. It's not just the Jordan Show anymore. So explain that.
I think over time, again, and just getting exposed to people who do it at a high level, and then even just getting exposed to the correct books and studying and learning how to grow and scale and progress and delegate and et cetera, I just had a real clear understanding of team, you know what I mean? And I've been blessed enough to be around some great leaders who understood those concepts as well, and I watched it happen, you know what I mean? And then for me, I think, even since being especially a teacher, I had people who worked underneath me and helped me, you know what I'm saying? So that was part of wanting to transition, was to have that team and understanding I wanted to do what I do best, right? But coordination has always been something that I had to do because that's what comes with the sport that we play, and I think I've always had a pretty good gift of knowing who are the correct players and where they should go via the sport actually, or just in life, and who to put around, you know what I mean? And over time, that network and the identification process of the right people led to the puzzle starting to come together, you know what I mean? And there's a lot of things started making sense on why I was certain places at certain times, why I met these people, and I wanted it to be bigger than the Jordan Show. That was part of why I transitioned. I didn't want it to be the Jordan Show. The Jordan Show has bandwidth that is limited, you know what I mean? So how can I create more of that, you know what I mean? And it was with people, right? And the right people. So, myself just kind of leading that charge and having a director of client relations who can help facilitate a lot of things, and, finalizing a deal with the director of marketing, to having people who go out and recruit, right? I'm still going to do some of that, but what I want to do is service my guys. I'm going to add people to the team naturally, recruiting from staff and then also athletes, but also just that admin piece was really important, you know what I mean? And having somebody to handle that admin stuff and offset that with almost like a CFO role, you know what I mean? And that's ultimately been super helpful, just to handle the back end of the business while I continue to grow it, you know what I mean? Because it like I said, it takes a village, you know what I mean, with surrounding the athlete, but also with surrounding yourself to ultimately have success, you know what I mean?
And then one piece I left out earlier is the legal piece, right? Because these contracts can get really dicey.
Yeah.
And you've built out this team of attorneys from big firms, small firms, guys who are maybe earlier in their career, so their bill rate's a little cheaper, so you can call them more often, to these other attorneys who are reviewing these 7-figure deals and up. Like, what somebody told me recently, and it's our friend Phil Nico, who I mentioned earlier, he said, John, what you and Attract bring is that you could speak accounting, but you also speak business owner, you speak entrepreneur. And so, I'm able to coach the nerdy accountants that own the debits and credits, and then I can go talk to the CEO and say, no, this is where we need to go. And I think that's the exact same thing as it is for you. You can level with these athletes and their parents, and yet you could turn around and go toe to toe with whoever's on the other side of the table, GMs and whatnot. And I just don't think that many people have that skill. Is that something that you developed over time, or is that just being real? Like you've always been that guy who can speak to the principal and the janitor and relate to both?
Yeah, I think it was developed over time, but I've always had a knack for people. I've always had people skill, but I think where I've been in, from a young age, right, sports gave me an opportunity to be diverse in a sense on who I was around, how I was coming up. Being good in sports allowed me to, play on select teams or whatever it may be, right, where the culture was different. But I learned the culture. I fit in with the culture. I went to a school to where they had people who had a lot of money who went to my school, right? My situation wasn't necessarily that. I lost my dad growing up, and people took a liking to me and wanted to help me, right? So like I would, I just last summer or summer before took the first family vacation with my mom and my sister. You get what I'm saying? But I was always on vacation though, you know what I mean? But it was with my friends.
Yeah.
But I got exposed to higher level of life and business and different things that way. And then, at LSU, from just dealing with administrative stuff to some of the most wealthy people in the community, but also having a real skill set in recruiting and dealing with the team, right? It just made me versatile, and I'm really grateful for that skill set. You know what I mean? It's almost like I can adapt to my environment, you know what I mean? And I think people skill take you a long way, Like whenever I told y'all earlier, I didn't know what I wanted to do whenever I was younger and people would ask me, I was like, I don't know, bro, but I mean, I just think being cool would take me a long way, bro. People like me. I don't know what it is. You know what I mean? Like somebody will look out. I just didn't know what that meant, but I knew that like I made friends and it would kind of work. You know what I mean? I'm like, man, I'm grateful for that. So anyway, I don't think a lot of people have or are that versed in that way, and it ultimately put me right where I needed to be. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know, it fits what I do, so 100%. I'm thankful.
and being cool is an attract core value. I mean, like be cool is one of our top 5. And so I think that's probably why, we get along so well. And so, in closing, right, we talked about the team, we talked about the athletes. What's next for DVG, right? Like just to timestamp it, we're in June of 2026, right? Fall camps could be starting in 2 months. What's next for you coming into the summer and then into the fall? And it's going to be cool to look back on this in a year and see how far we've come. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. What's next for DVG? I think growth. You know what I mean? It's been interesting and it's been growing fast, with just the addition of staff and also the addition of athletes and them piling in, right? And that's been good. And I think it'll continue to grow with both, and I don't know, there may even be some sort of evolution, right, where started just football oriented, and football is my background, but quickly even just some other sports have been asking about representation, and some of the attorneys that I have a part of the team are doing deals in that particular sport already, so it gives them, or gives us a knowledge base of that particular sport. So that's just been a thought, you know what I mean? But right now, it's just focusing on just strategy and process and service, and having the right people and making sure that, the young folks that I'm adding staff-wise, I can just coach and coordinate them the right way so that they can run, you know what I mean, and have success. And I think ultimately it'll be fun to look back in a year, I think it'll evolve a lot. I'm interested to see how the landscape will continue to evolve, Right now you'll see us being primarily college focused. We will then evolve to pro focus as the time continues to go, and there'll be some acquisition there, I think, staff wise as well. But yeah, growth is what I'm looking forward to, man. And, it'll be an exciting ride, and I appreciate you being a part of it.
No, I'm happy to be a part of it, man. I'm happy to be a part of the team, get to know you and your team and the athletes even better. It feels very rewarding doing what it is that we do. It's not something that I really felt like, at the time when we started Attract, we had no idea what NIL would turn into. I mean, I knew that with my experience as a student athlete and being able to be relatable, like you, same way. Anytime you play D1 college football, like it's a culture shock. But being able to make friends no matter what, like I knew that it would turn into something great. And, with just some of the access that we have, like sometimes I look back and I'm like, man, this is kind of, it's very, like you couldn't have drawn it up, and so we're happy to be a part of it, and we're happy to just make a difference. I mean, that's what Attract does in business owners and student athletes. I want to make a difference in the lives of our team members too. And I know that aligns exactly with where you're at. So, man, any closing thoughts?
If you need some accounting work in the Louisiana, Baton Rouge area, Attract is the place to be, man. Come see my guy, John.
I appreciate that, bro. Well, thank you guys for listening, man. This is going to be a good one. So thank you all.